Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service. Here today to present a lesson on the Aries point and midpoints that come together at the Aries point. Actually, I'm really going to focus on the midpoints regarding the Aries point. In order to do that, I had to choose a chart. And in order to do that, I actually called a friend/client for some ideas. And we talked about Cuba and Haiti, and I actually did the research and found their charts, and I have erected them. But I actually decided to go with Virgin Galactic's launch because I wanted to go with something that was a little happier, more positive, something that everyone could get on board with. And also because there's going to be 3 launches when it's all said and done. And I thought it'd be really fun to compare the charts between Richard Branson and Virgin Galactica, and then Jeff Bezos and his company, and Elon Musk and his company. And I just thought it'd be really fun to look at them all. So I thought, why not? And I have to tell you, I was not disappointed, and I don't think you will be either. So before we get into all of the chart work, I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I want to thank all of my subscribers to all of the venues. I appreciate so much you guys helping to get me out there. I'm actually a hermit by nature, and this is the best of all worlds for me. And so thank you so much for helping me out, because I do love teaching. And I can do it right from my office, which is really fun. So thank you. If you're not a subscriber, please consider becoming one. And if you would, like, share, comment, I'd love to hear from you. So I am going to look first at the dial. So we're going to be starting with solar fire today. I'm going to look first at the axis of the Aries point. And we're then going to look at the axis of the sun, very short on that. We're going to compare the 2 charts between the launch and the actual beginning of the broadcast. And just, again, because it is amazing what you can get from astrology. And I want to present that to you so that you can be as excited about it as I am. So let's jump in and let's look at the chart that I have here here we go. So here I am, and the first thing I want to show, this is the actual beginning of the broadcast, and I'm going to spend most of my time on this chart. First of all, there's not a whole lot of difference between the charts. The ascendant and the midheaven does change slightly, and I will talk about that. But the chart itself, it's only a half-hour difference, so there isn't going to be a whole lot of change. Now, as we look at this chart, the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the midpoint tree. And in the midpoint tree, the first thing I want to point out is the fact that the ascendant and the midheaven together form a midpoint at the Aries point. Okay? That means that taking the surroundings, the environment, and the social status, what that future is, the social status, and you draw them together, it's an Aries point. So this chart is a lot about the Aries point. It's about getting information out there. You'll see that in a moment, but I can tell you that we start off by noting that the midheaven and the ascendant form a midpoint at the Aries point. It's so awesome. And actually it is 0 degrees Cancer, so it is up here. Other things that really jumped out at me were this, the midheaven to Venus midpoint. That tells us that, well, money is involved, and it takes money, and this is about money. But think about what this is. It's the beginning of a space race between billionaires. I mean, really, money? Yeah. So it is about money. It's also very expensive to do, which keeps coming up in all the commentaries, that this isn't going to be for the general public for some time. This is only for the very wealthy. So Venus is very much a part of the midheaven. The other thing about Venus and midheaven is it is about spending a lot of money to do or to present. And that is very true. I think that we can all agree upon. Another interesting midpoint. Well, it isn't. We start with Saturn, and ascendant Saturn is that it is about some kind of trip or some kind of travel. Ascendant Jupiter, I'm sorry, Jupiter Saturn does relate to taking a trip, okay? And ascendant Saturn is about separating, saying goodbye, if you will. Well, it really was a trip, and it really was about saying goodbye, saying hello as well, but that was very appropriate, okay? The other thing that I wanted to point out, and a lot of astrologers will tell you that perhaps seeing a Mars-Saturn isn't a great thing to see, but actually in this particular case, I think it's fine because first of all, it is about energy put into a separation or a trip, okay, in this case, to take this trip out of the orbit, okay, very much fitting of what is going on that day. The other thing is that Richard Branson is the oldest of the three gentlemen that are doing this. And it's also the actions of the older, and he is the first. So it's not about a heartbreak in this case. It literally is about the trip itself and the actions to take the trip. And believe it or not, I mean, they had to go to school for 7 days. They had to do, so Saturn is very big in this chart, and so is Mars. So they both are extremely, this is an active situation, if you will, with that Mars and Saturn. Okay, and they're in fixed signs. So let me just go here and show you this. Saturn to Mars, okay, so Mars, Saturn creates this huge factors that all apply to the Aries point. Not necessarily directly, because for example, you're only talking about an 11-degree Saturn of, is it even 11? Let's go back to the chart and find out just so that I can be absolutely correct on this. When you're looking at this, yeah, it's 11 degrees. I was right. Okay, so you have an 11-degree Saturn and you have an 18 degrees of Mars. When you pull those two together, you're in the Aries point. They are not in the Aries point. Each of those is too far. But because they can aspect each other as a midpoint, the midpoint is the Aries point. I hope that made sense. Okay, so that's my point about all of this down here, okay, with the exception of Uranus. Now, Uranus is a part of the midpoints too, but Uranus is also ideally within that 1-degree range of the Aries point. That Uranus also rules things like space programs. They talked about freedom, I think, that day, and that's all Uranus speak. So Uranus is very active in this Aries point, okay? And it's important because that's what the world came to see, the Aries point. They came to see Uranus. Something unusual, spectacular related to the space program, something different, unique, okay? Beautiful. So this Aries point is just slamming with information, but most of the information is planetary. There are some asteroids, I'm going to get to them now, but I really wanted to focus on how many planets are affecting this Aries point, okay? And as you can see, there's a number. And again, even if you were to bring it to here, which is the other part, you're still, again, it's a company, and it's true, that's the Cupido, okay? It's also an organization of billionaires. So there's the Venus Pallas, and I'll get to that in a minute because Pallas does play a role in this when we get to the Sun axis. So but Pallas also plays a role because there's a lot of strategy and a lot of money involved. So you can see right here that it plays. So you you know, this particular chart is so accurate because it's really talking about a lot of planets hitting into that, the midpoints of those Aries points. So it was a great chart for me to choose. I'm very happy that I did. So let's talk a little bit about what falls in the Aries point in addition to what I just pulled out. Okay, so I pulled out all of this, which I just spoke about. And we did go through the midpoint trees. So I don't have to worry about that. But one of the things we didn't talk about yet is that Mercury is right in that Aries point, whereas Poseidon is only slightly out of that Aries point. But because it's in this mess of things, it is going to hit other things in midpoint, okay, because of its close proximity. It's only minutes away. And there's a lot of things that are only minutes away, so it kind of pulls everything back in. This whole lineup, though, is really incredible because it was a total Mercury moment. It was on TV. It was like they interrupted programming and the whole 9 yards to make sure that we saw this, which was really cool. Okay, that was cool. I do have some issues, like a lot of other people do, that we're going to space during a time when we're in a pandemic and we have economies not doing well and they're spending bazillions of dollars to go out of space. You know, what can I say? It's, you know, if you had a lot of money and you're of a certain age, I guess it's what you do. So you do space things. So anyway, the Mercury, though, is going to highlight later because there's a lot that goes on in this axis that we're going to talk about as we get into the asteroids. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to start pulling in the other asteroids. And there's not a lot, ironically, before I go to the sun axis. So the in this Aries point, the first thing I want to point out is it's called Nachbar, if I'm saying that right, Nachbar. I think it's a German word. I think it means neighbor. And I don't think that the Bezos and Elon Musk and Branson are neighbors. They're not, but they are in a way colleagues because they're all billionaires. They're all of a certain group. And remember that it does show up as a midheaven Cupido. So it does have something to do with, you know, being a part of the group. You know, it does. Now, I'm going to just go through and let's see, there's more. Look over here, and this is Bacchus. Now, Bacchus is out of control, oftentimes associated with like addictions like drugs and alcohol, because those are things that kind of get out of control. But we're going to look at it differently because remember that it's a part of a midpoint. Now, we could bring in Zeus, because Zeus is for rockets and gunfire and, you know, even a level of restraint and excitement, which are all applicable, okay? Even to Bacchus, you know, things that are kind of out of control. I mean, this is out of this world, okay? So it could be rockets that go out of this world, but it really makes sense when you realize that there's an asteroid here called Odysseus. And Odysseus is the traveler. It's the unfamiliar circumstances and situations and places. And that's exactly what this is. Blew my mind when I saw that. And that's another reason why it's so popular to the public. The world wants to see this. So that was mind-blowing. Okay. So there's more. There's more. Now, I did mention, no, I don't think I did on this video yet, Cassandra's down here in the Aries point, and Cassandra relates to listening, it's advice. They were advised. We were all listening, particularly at the launch, because the visuals were tough because they were in and out. When it comes to visuals, I think it's harder to keep it in range, probably because of the pixelation and all that. But auditorily, you could hear more of what was going on. And it was listening to command control, so there was a lot of listening involved. The Mercury was involved in listening. And also, I mentioned Knocker up there. So realize that the two other men were probably listening to this, watching this, listening to this. And they're younger than he is, Mercury. See how many ways astrology can play into this? So it's just beautiful, beautiful astrology. So then we go down to Pan. Yeah. Oh no, risk. Risk is over here. So in this aspect here, we have risk, okay? Now risk is right in the Aries point, and we know that was accurate because I remember sitting there watching it with my significant other, and he had made the comment that this could be a walking on the moon situation, or it could be a Challenger, which is one of the crafts that blew up. So it was a risk. The other thing I want to point up on this axis, which I haven't talked about much yet, is these two. And I always talk about when I'm doing my own practice, I like to throw in these scenarios using the asteroids and the pictures that they make to create little stories that could be directly related to what I'm talking to, or they might not, because I like to just talk about them because they're like those little subtle details that blow people's minds. Okay. Well, this is memory, and this one's childhood memories. Did he not talk about, since he's a kid, going to space? Or at least Bezos, one of them did, because it was definitely talked about, I believe, that day. Okay. It's also about the memories of when NASA did the first moonwalk. Lots of memories of people being children then. And so there's this memory. Okay. Now, if you tie it to everything together, okay, so you've got this Uranus, and you've got listening, and then you've got, one of the things about the memory too is that I'm old enough to remember that. And we're living in a very decisive time right now. And the one thing we really do need is something that can rise us above our divisiveness. And oftentimes space travel can do that. Because a lot of people are interested in space travel, and it doesn't have anything to do with your ideology. So it has to do a lot with that form of science. And particularly men, although some women too, that's like a huge deal. So I think that the memory and the child thing, very, very appropriate on even the most subtle of levels. Okay. Ironically, risk is right in the middle of that because risk is the Aries point. These two, they tie into the Aries point, but they themselves are not in the Aries point. Surely we watching don't have to worry about memorizing anything. And the childhood stuff is in there, but I think it's more related, again, not everybody remembers that. So it doesn't apply to all public. As a matter of fact, if you're Mercury, if you're really, really young, you probably don't remember that because you weren't here yet. Okay. My daughter wasn't. So, a lot of adults that are around today were not around then. So it's a memory from a childhood that has more to do with the Saturn, Mars than it has to do with the Mercury. So, but, just to kind of throw that in there, that it is about people talking about it. Because remember that most importantly, Mercury is communication. And people are talking about it. Okay, so now I'm getting ready to do the second portion of those asteroids, which there was nothing in there. I mean, you got to understand there's a lot of midpoints I could be talking about with astrology, but I don't want to keep us here forever, and I want to stick with the ones that are a lot easier and that are more directly related to it. Because when you get into 22,000 asteroids, there's just asteroids everywhere, and not all asteroids might be applicable. I mean, they are in a way, but maybe not in a way that we can so easily jump at and grasp. Okay, the way I sort of feel about the Pan equals Weasley thing, okay, which I'm getting to right now. Weasley is faulty perceptions. Pan is necessary evils. And Pan happens to be the next asteroid that falls up here, and Weasley happens to fall down here, and they're not midpoints. They're the real deal. And if that be the case, then what is it that's a necessary evil, and how does that deal with faulty perceptions? Do we have a faulty perception about what a necessary evil is? I'm not sure, and that's one of those I would throw out to you, and I'd say, as you're listening to this, if you have more insight than I do, I would love to hear it, because I've gone through this chart a few times, and, I just tried to pick the highlights, like I said, but when I got to Weasley down here, and I did, and Pan at the top, I wasn't quite sure what the faulty perceptions were or the necessary evils. I know the one necessary evil is that it was a risk. That I do get, okay? But, so I do get it, and I think if I thought about it for a couple of days, I'd probably figure it out. So just, again, to see what else I can find. I think that I did cover that. Oh, BAM. BAM is one some people don't use, I use. But to me, that it BAM, which fell up here and there, I do, and you notice that there is a white moon there. So there is something that can be gained from this experience too. Because I do look at white Selena and Lilith when I do things like this. But I also, just getting some jumping again, just getting back to BAM. BAM means like it went off without a hitch. Everything was exactly when it was supposed to happen, in the order it was supposed to happen. It was BAM. Okay. So that's what that is. And I think I got the rest. I did want to do BAM though. And I think, yeah. Industria, being productive, well, the whole thing is productive. And I'm going to get to that more when I get to the sun the sun axis. And then I do believe there was nothing on this side. I'm just double checking, but no. Okay. So just a reminder, Mezzanine is only out by 6 minutes, but it's still out. And I, as an astrologer, because I do asteroids, would rather look at it than through the midpoint, because one of the things that I'm trying to impress upon the lesson is that when you're working with a midpoint, you cannot look at one energy without considering the other energies, especially in the case of a midpoint, okay? When you're looking at an axis, just like I did the Mercury risk thing, you're the whole thing, they always are talking to each other. But when you're looking at risk as a whole, or you're looking at Mercury as a whole, that's one thing. But down here, when you're looking at Saturn and Mars, you can't look at them separately, because they're never in the Aries point as separate factors. Okay, I hope that made sense. Now, I'm going to come into the next section, because there was like 3 sections on this. And we're going to go to that sun at 1930. A little bit over, but you can see from here. Okay, it is about, okay, oh, this is so awesome. Take that midpoint tree, and one of the first thing is an Astrea with Uranus, which means that there's nothing that's going to be resolved or in this situation, that this is a part of an ongoing scenario, which is true, it is. Over here, we look at this as the beginning of a dream. Hecate is a dream, Clotho is beginnings, and they both equal the sun, which is the day. This is a day when it's the beginning of dreams. Okay? So that's like really cool, all right? Because it is. Can you put it any perfectly? And it's about a vehicle. Okay? So, which is Phaethon. So the day is about a vehicle, which is giving us the beginning of dreams. And that's exactly what they all have talked about. It's also about specialized work, because that's what it took to get there. And here's another one that's really good. If you take the 19 degrees and you go back 22 and a half. So right here would be 20, 1, 2, and then a half would be right at 27 degrees. So I'm going to take that off. I'm going to bring everything to about, oops, 27 degrees. Sure I am. Oh, there we are. It equals Vesta. Okay, so Vesta is work. Okay, so it's a goal. It's a goal. And right here is the midpoint, right here, right there. It's a square too for each, but it's also a midpoint for the midheaven and Saturn, for the future of this discipline is working at this travel Saturn space. Okay, so that also applies. It not far away, within a degree. Okay, so you could go, there it is Pallas, which directly equals the midheaven. Now that's saying that there's a lot of planning and strategy and even politics involved in the future of this program, but also in its social status. And I think we can all agree that that is also true. So that's just looking, and that's real brief. That's so brief, okay? Now I'm going to look at the charts as wheels just for a second. And a couple things I want to point out. First of all, the endings shows up on both charts, as does Uranus. Now, it's not telling us that this is an ending. What it's telling us is that on the day of the launch, it was the end of, and of course it was, years and years of planning and work. And this is that. So it's the space program. Okay? So that's really cool. I thought that was really cool. Okay? So I wanted to look at that. I wanted to also really show that look at how Uranus is sitting up here at this midheaven. Okay? Well, guess what? Whoops, let's do it this way. Let's do it this way. Here's the other chart, and look at that. It's still on the midheaven. It's just from the 10th house and sitting right on the midheaven. And it crossed over the midheaven while it was in air, or I'm sorry, while it was broadcasting, because this is when it was in air. So it's interesting that this has all been about this space thing, and it's Uranus, and it was crossing over. But you'll see here endings still very much a focus, very much a selfish project, which it was, Venus and Mars. I don't know. I don't want to say that in a really bad way. Jupiter, it's about a trip, okay? Jupiter and Saturn make a strange straddle here. Jupiter's in, although out of sign in. Saturn is not in, but they both formulate right around that. And it is about a trip. And that's what the chart is about, the trip. Okay, so that was pretty interesting all the way around. I thought it was, again, a really interesting chart overall, because it really does talk about what was really going on that day. It's incredible. It's phenomenal. You don't really have to look. I'm not really going to spend any time on the angles, as I sometimes do, because the real focus was not so much the chart as it was the Aries point of the chart, which is the 0 degree points of Capricorn, Cancer, Libra, and Aries, or 2230 around there of the same signs, Capricorn, Cancer, Libra, and Aries. But it could also be 15 degrees of fixed, which would be Scorpio, Taurus, Leo, and Aquarius, or it could be 730 mutable, which would be Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius. Okay? Now, you would need to know that information so that we could take it then to Janus. So let's pull up Janus for a moment. So here we have the Janus chart, and the thing I wanted to show on the Janus, I'm not as proficient with using a dial here, but one of the things that I wanted to do was go into the midpoints, and I wanted to show, like for instance, Jupiter and Saturn at a midpoint, because that's a trip. I wanted to look at Sun, Aries point, because that's the day, and we want to look at, there we go. We want to look at that. We also want to look at the ascendant, although we know that this will form that. Let me think, it's the midheaven for, oh, because you got to do these things in order they want, there it is. So then it's there, and add that. So what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm adding points in the chart to see where they're going to fall. And I'm going to do things that relate to what's happening, like the trip, okay, the sun. So what we're doing is we're just kind of grabbing things from the chart just to see where it falls, okay? And there you go. So then what you do is you put, now here we go, ascendant midheaven definitely equals an Aries point. There you have it, 0 degrees Cancer, 10 minutes. All right? There was one more that also did. Let me go back in, because I had done this before. I believe it was Apollon Chronos, which would be the business of flight, because Chronos is high up, okay? So I would look up, that was Chronos. Now I'm going to have to know the order that they're in. There it is. And then Apollon, there it is, at a midpoint. So that's one that we want to look at. We might want to look at Chronos with that. So that's the business of, or the expansion of. But we could also look at Chronos with Jupiter. Actually, we'd have to start this way because Jupiter's first, and then Chronos. So you can see there's an order, and on this program you do have to stay there. So let's just put that on for the heck of it. Did I put it in there? Oh, there it is. Okay. So there are some midpoints for us to look at. And here we're 10 minutes out, Chronos, Apollon, the business, but we already know that 10 minutes out means that something else will probably pull that in. So that's not far out. This is definitely in the Aries point. You see how that works? This one isn't. Okay, so the Jupiter Chronos isn't really in the Aries point. The 21 degrees, that's a little bit out. But look at how it fell on the descendant. Okay, because that's what I told you, is that Jupiter and Saturn were not far from that ascendant, that descendant rather, and this would put them, would that be their midpoint, which is very close to that point. So one of the things that we can do as astrologers is we can go in through midpoints and pick out if something happens to aspect something else, okay? Now, if you remember, if you're looking at the sun aspect, then we might be looking at something at 27 degrees of mutable and 1930 of cardinal, and so on and so forth. So you could create a completely different axis. You would write those numbers down that are in that axis, and then you could do your midpoints and see what comes up in the axis itself. So the next thing that I did was I went to the next part, and here I did a sun, and I did the same thing where I took Apollon and Chronos. So I'm going to start with those. I'm just going to kind of keep with the same, because the idea that the airplane business or the business is that. The other one that I would use is probably, and we'll do it on this one, is Apollon. And we will add that to the list. And then the other thing that I thought would be really cool to look at is Uranus, because remember that Uranus is also part of that. And I'll add that in with a Chronos. And then I'll also add Uranus in with Apollon. And I might add, along with that a Zeus, because of it being rockets and engines and all of that. So you see how I'm doing this? You see how I'm adding? You can do this. And I love this this is why I love this program. Okay? So I'm going to just do okay on this. We can just see where they fall. Okay. So I'll tell you what's really interesting. 12 degrees and 21 degrees are 9 degrees apart. If you go in there, it'd be about 4 degrees or whatever. That's really close. That gets it even closer to the Aries point. Okay, so when you start building these things, you might find yourself going back to that Aries point. All right, and oh wow, that is the Aries point. So how about the Apollon Chronos Sun? That is the Aries point at 2931. That's within 29 minutes of the Aries point because it's mutable at the very end. So you're getting ready to go into Cardinal. That's wonderful. So we have a couple things that still hit there. Just looking for another. No. Very interesting. So I hope that we understood how I did that. And if you do have any questions, ask me in the comments. I would love to. I have a notice when anyone sends me a comment, and I can get back to you usually within 24 hours. But isn't that incredible? Just incredible. And all of this comes from Virgin Galactic's chart. And then we can go to the same midpoints will come up, and they're going to be very much the same because a lot of this stuff doesn't change. Now, ironically, the ascendant midheaven do change, and that doesn't put that any longer in the midheaven point, which is interesting. But that's actually, it's already in the air. So the news is still there. Mercury's still in the Aries point, but the ascendant and the midheaven, the chart, in other words, the whole makeup of the chart isn't the presentation to the public that the other chart showed it to be. So I hope that you understood that too. Sometimes I feel like I'm speaking another language. So let me come back. So I hope that that was as much fun for you as it was me. That's the stuff that I love about astrology, that if you want to see something reflected, check the astrology chart out. You're going to get details just like we did. And really, we were skimming the surface. I mean, there's probably a lot more that we could do. You could spend a lot of time on any one chart. But the object today was the lesson. And the lesson was about midpoints and the Aries point, which is what I'm going to probably be calling this, though I'll have a subtitle that it is the Virgin Galactic launch that we're using or looking at. So with that said, I hope that you will all stay well and take care. And as always, thank you for watching this video. So, and if you do have comments, please comment. And I have to leave it as I always do. Until we meet again, my friends, I wish you only happy reading.